The sky didn't just darken, it descended. What began as a distant murmur over the Pacific turned into something far more ominous, something that locals would later describe not as a storm, but as a presence, a slow-moving force that refused to leave. By the time the second Kona low system arrived, Oahu was already saturated, exhausted, and vulnerable. The island had no more room to breathe. Rain fell with a persistence that defied logic, not in bursts, not in scattered showers, but in a relentless, unbroken cascade. Streets blurred into rivers. Rivers swelled into monsters, and the land, once firm and familiar, began to give way beneath the weight of it all. In Wahiawa, tension grew quietly at first. The dam had stood for over a century, a silent sentinel holding back millions of gallons of water. Generations had passed beneath its shadow, trusting its strength without question. But now, under the crushing pressure of unprecedented rainfall, that trust began to fracture. Engineers monitored it around the clock. Small readings became alarming signals. Seepage turned into concern. Concern turned into urgency. And then came the warning. A potential failure. Two words that changed everything. Sirens broke through the storm's roar. Emergency alerts lit up phones across Oahu's north shore. Evacuation orders spread rapidly, but the rain didn't slow to accommodate escape. Roads were already compromised, some completely swallowed. Others turned into dangerous currents where vehicles became liabilities rather than lifelines. Families scrambled. Some grabbed essentials. Others fled with nothing but the clothes they were wearing. There was no time to process, no time to prepare, only time to move. Helicopters cut through sheets of rain, their blades echoing against the chaos below. Rescuers worked against impossible conditions, pulling stranded residents from rooftops, from vehicles trapped in rising water, from homes that were no longer homes. Over 200 people were lifted to safety, each rescue a narrow victory against a storm that refused to relent. In Halewa and Wailea, entire neighborhoods transformed into flood zones within hours. Water surged with such force that it didn't just enter homes, it tore them apart. Foundations cracked, walls collapsed. Structures that had stood for decades were uprooted and carried away like debris. Witnesses spoke of hearing deep, unsettling sounds beneath the storm, the groan of shifting electrode, the splintering of wood, the terrifying realization that the ground itself was no longer stable. And still, the rain kept falling, 50 inches. Then more. Numbers that seemed impossible began to lose meaning as reality overtook measurement. This was no longer about records. It was about survival. Emergency shelters filled quickly. Thousands displaced. Families separated in the rush. Communication lines strained. Power outages plunged entire areas into darkness, amplifying the fear. Some residents watched helplessly as water climbed inch by inch inside their homes. Others returned briefly, risking everything just to retrieve a photograph, but document a piece of their past. For many, it was already too late. The governor addressed the state with a grave tone. Damage estimates soared past $1 billion, but the financial cost felt secondary to the emotional toll unfolding across the islands. Because this wasn't just destruction, it was displacement. It was uncertainty. It was loss layered upon loss. On Maui, the situation carried a haunting weight of its own. Communities still recovering from the scars of the 2023 Lahaina wildfire now faced a new threat, water instead of fire, but just as unforgiving. Flood warnings spread across areas that had barely begun to rebuild. The Elretic, already fragile, struggled to absorb the deluge. Mudslides became a looming danger. Ash and debris mixed with rain, creating unstable terrain that threatened to move without warning. For residents who had already endured one disaster, the return of fear felt almost unbearable. Back on Oahu, attention remained fixed on the Wahiawa Dam. Crews worked tirelessly, reinforcing, monitoring, calculating every possible outcome. The margin for error was non-existent. A full failure would unleash a catastrophic surge downstream, one that evacuation efforts were racing to stay ahead of. Time stretched. Hours felt like days. Every update carried weight. And then, a fragile relief. The structure held for now. But the danger didn't disappear. It lingered embedded in saturated alderud and swollen waterways. Even as rainfall began to ease, the aftermath revealed a landscape transformed. Roads were carved apart, bridges weakened, entire sections of infrastructure rendered unusable. What had once been familiar terrain now required navigation as if it were unknown territory. Recovery efforts began immediately, but progress was slow. Conditions remained hazardous. Standing water concealed debris, sharp edges, and hidden drop-offs. Each step required caution. Communities came together in ways that only disaster can force. Neighbors helped neighbors. Strangers became lifelines. Volunteers distributed supplies, offered shelter, shared information. In the face of overwhelming destruction, humanity surfaced with quiet strength. But beneath that resilience was exhaustion. A deep, lingering fatigue from fighting something that couldn't be controlled, only endured. Experts began analyzing the event, searching for explanations, patterns, warnings for the future. The convergence of two Kona low systems, the intensity of rainfall, the strain on aging infrastructure, it all pointed to a reality that felt increasingly difficult to ignore. Events like this were no longer rare. They were escalating. The question wasn't just how this happened, it was how often it might happen again. For residents, the focus remained immediate rebuild, recover, return, but even those words felt uncertain, because some things couldn't be rebuilt exactly as they were. Some places were altered permanently, some losses couldn't be measured in numbers, and some fears would linger long after the Oahu receded. As the skies finally began to clear, the silence that followed felt almost unnatural. No pounding rain, no howling wind, just the quiet aftermath of something immense. Debris scattered across roads, homes marked by water lines that told their own story, vehicles stranded in places they were never meant to be, and people standing, watching, absorbing what had just unfolded, trying to understand it, trying to accept it, trying to move forward. But one truth remained unavoidable. This wasn't just a storm that passed. It was a warning that stayed.